In this episode of All Things Conflict with me, your host, Maria Arpa, I am over the moon to welcome Conroy Harris. I met Conroy a few years ago and our conversation was a 3-hour conversation, and I was riveted by this man and the depth of his wisdom and knowledge and experience. He is a shadow work therapist, and he will explain that to us, the depth of his work and the broadness of what he does. So I'm really excited about where we're going. I don't think there's going to be enough time to say everything we want to say, but please, let's join the conversation. Conroy, how amazing that we are having this conversation now. We were connected through a mutual friend, and then we met, and you were the CEO of a band of brothers at that time. And I just have a memory, it's a good couple of years ago, I have a memory of a 3-hour conversation over an Indian meal somewhere in Oxford or somewhere. And I just remember being deeply touched by the things you shared, by your ethics, your principles, your view on life. And then we kind of lost contact. And I think we were sort of scrambling to find each other one way or another. And then suddenly it all came back together again earlier this year. And, I've just been deeply moved by the way you operate. And then I discovered that you do something called shadow work, which is much needed. So why don't you just kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what shadow work is and how you came into that?
Firstly, thanks, Maria. What a wonderful welcome. I feel very at home. I almost feels like I'm in your sitting room just having a chat with you. And the place we had that 3-hour conversation was a place called Dozer Park.
Oh, yeah.
By the railway station in Oxford. So I'll give them a little plug because it was a wonderful meal we had that day and great conversation. Never forget it. It stayed with me for such a long time. And it's been really amazing for me to get back in contact with you, and kind of things have picked up since then in my life. You are a lucky charm on some levels to me. Kind of lots of wonderful things been happening around our connection, going out to Granada together and exploring some of the things out there as we did. But you asked me a specific thing around shadow work, so that's where I'll go. Just for the record, I am also a kind of qualified coach, and I do executive coaching as well. And in the field of shadow work, that's a therapeutic qualification. It's similar to being like a psychotherapist, although that word is so overused and it's become to mean so many things to so many people. So I actually just like the term facilitator. I facilitate people's journey into the shadow part of our psyche, that part that's hidden from us, that part that we see when it comes out, when we're annoyed, we're angry, and we suddenly snap. And there is something that sits kind of in our general energetic field that we just don't often get a grasp to. That's the other side of us. Jung first came up with the concept of the shadow, although it's been kind of known to humankind for thousands of years that there's this other side to us. This in earlier Christian times, they'd say you had the kind of the good angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. That's again kind of a reference to the dark part of our psyche. Well, in shadow work and doing that work, we believe that so-called dark side of the psyche, it holds a lot of the answers to our early traumas, to our kind of sense of disconnectedness with ourselves and with what's around us. And by integrating ourselves back with the dark part of us, we get to be more whole as a human being. And it's that wholeness that we're looking for. It's not about being perfect, but it's about being able to embrace all that we are even the bits we don't like, even the bits where we think, oh God, look at me doing it, and we're down on ourselves, where we're persecuting ourselves. In there are kind of clues to what can actually help heal the idea that we're not as perfect as we'd like to be. So that, in a nutshell, is what we do with shadow work. We go to the dark parts, we look to integrate them, and we give people the opportunity to face that shadow and allow that to become all of who they are and accepted all of who we are, because that's what's important. Yes, that's a brief piece there.
Yeah, that's a really lovely description, because, you know, I might use different words for that. And in Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, we refer to the jackal, which could be the shadow, and giving people a place to come face to face, to really look in that reflection, to see the mirror of themselves and the dark side of ourselves, where it's safe to do so, because there are not many places in society where we can do that, which isn't followed by some kind of humiliation or punishment. Maybe you could speak to that.
Exactly that. Let's just take one aspect of that if you feel like anger. And for the anger is seen as a destructive force that sits within us. And we have a polarized society in so many ways. And the way we socialize our young people around anger is, boys, your anger is dangerous. You are dangerous because of your anger. And girls growing up to become young women, you're not allowed to express anger. That is not something that should be open to you. And it makes you a less of an acceptable female, woman, girl to be expressing anger. So you need to be nice, and you need to be all these things that kind of are put onto young people very as they grow up in their early socialization. And that's such, you spoke before of me working with an organization called a Band of Brothers, where I was chief executive for 5 years. I spent 10 years with that organization altogether. And with Band of Brothers, we were a mentoring organization, rites of passage organization, working with young men, 18 to 24, in the criminal justice system. Young men who kind of had lost their way, young men who, many of them had early life traumas. Most of them had some level of early life trauma. And many of them having real difficulty in how they could be with expressing their anger safely. It was not safe for young men to be expressing that anger. And the anger would be expressed in kind of a uber way, if you like, kind of destructive way, destructive to self, destructive to others, not safe expression. So within shadow work, with the work we do, it's how do I connect with that anger and use it as a force of good, use it as a force which is meant to be, which drives towards action, to change, create boundaries, create safety. Anger is a beautiful, necessary human emotion that so many of us have been disconnected from. And with the women I work with, giving permission to step into that anger, giving permission to say, yes, I'm allowed to set boundaries. Yes, I'm allowed not to have this happen to me in my life. And just permissioning that and connecting people to that driving force can be so healing for so many people. So that's one aspect. That's just one emotion. We can look at grief. We can look at fear. All these things that kind of are somehow often taboo within us, kind of our deep sexual kind of fears and anxieties. Many of these things sit in the shadow, sit in the dark spaces. And what we like to do is bring whatever is dark, bring whatever is unsavory out of the darkness into the light, and be using that as a force for healing, as a force towards wholeness. I hope that explains a little bit of.
It's absolutely. I mean, it's magical to me. It's magical that we can provide such spaces for people. And I think I wanted to draw a distinction, because when we say, you know, we want to look at that anger, we want to hear about it, we want to understand it. And the difference between you explaining to me what you're angry about, how that anger is affecting you. There's a big difference between showing people that they can express their anger, but they don't have to act it out. And then people get in trouble because they've become pressure cookers that explode, and then they let the anger out because they're acting the anger out, not expressing the anger. Is that helpful, or does that make sense?
That makes so much sense, and that's so well put, because there's two sides to that. Kind of an overexpression of, as you say, anger when it's not expressed safely can turn into rage. And that's what we often see. The rage that comes out when people kind of, they snap, they lose their temper, they lose their cool, and something happens. We see that so often in road rage incidents. We see that in kind of neighborly disputes. Something just, it goes too far. And there's another side to that. There's the opposite side to that, where anger can't be expressed at all. I worked in mental health for a long time, and we used to say unexpressed anger is what often turns to depression. And kind of that sits underneath that. When you can't get to any sense of action or movement, that kind of lowness, that depressive state can often be where people can't express that anger. And you're so right. How do we get people to express that safely and use that without it going over the top, which so many people fear that if I get angry, if I let it all out, someone's going to get hurt, something's going to get hurt. Well, not the way we do it in shadow work. We give people a place to safely express that, even to its fullest. People can be screaming and shouting and kind of letting go, releasing the anger, fully held safely and facilitated. And then we go to the other side, which is often grief, sadness, and tears. Often.
Absolutely, yeah. Because anger's just a mask, isn't it? It's a barrier to the deeper stuff. And then I was thinking about, as you were talking, I was thinking about the safe expression of anger and the suppression of anger, and how our mainstream society pedals very hard to suppress anger in people by providing distractions. So some of those distractions we self-impose, addictions, going to the gym obsessively, consumerism, lots of things that we do. So we never allow it to catch up with us and never allow it to come to the surface. And then society imposes restrictions and distractions on us by criminalising people, by medicating people, all sorts of things, by, putting people into slavery thinly disguised as employment. And so therefore what we're doing, putting people in debt, encouraging people to get into debt. There are lots of hidden ways in which people either do it to themselves or society does it to keep people in a state of suppression, and that can never take us to anywhere good. It's not a sustainable proposition.
Again, so well said and so well put. And for me, a lot of the things you spoke about there, although these distractions into, be it kind of drugs, be it kind of the addictions, even the shopping addictions, gym addiction, all these things are expressions of something that we're feeling lost with inside of ourselves. We're looking and the need for distraction away from being with emotions that we have not been taught how to be with. You said something to me some weeks back that stayed with me for so long. It's like we were talking about working with couples. We were talking about the discourse between people. And he says, well, we taught how to do mathematics. We taught how to kind of write English, and we taught all these things. And yet we're not taught how to communicate. That very basic thing, how I can communicate my sense of dis-ease to another person without it coming out as attacking, shaming, or blaming. We've kind of that very basic thing that we all do. We communicate, but we can so often communicate from different spaces. And that level of frustration that so many of us have about not being able to communicate, not feeling heard, not feeling accepted, means we look to distractions away from that pain, distractions that takes away from needing to feel that. And that's easily found. Like if I go down the gym, pump some weights, if I drink a load of alcohol, whatever it is. Personally, I've even been looking at my addiction to football and kind of how that the bread and circuses kind of thing, the opium of the masses, taking me away from, I can just narrow in on the TV, and I can be lost in soccer. So I've recently withdrawn my emotional connection to that sport that's become so solid by big finance and money. It's another sad reflection of how the world out there. Everything that's pure for so many people seems to have been monetarized and consumerized against us. And unless we're a consumer to it, somehow we lose connection to it. And that's just another area. But
amazing. Oh yeah. I mean, look, we could do a whole special just on that topic. But we have a limited time here, and I really want to kind of manipulate the conversation into somewhere else that I know is important to both of us. And that is, so we've got all this suppressed stuff going on in people, the shadow work, sitting there. And then you've got people then join organisations. And one of the things I know you've been exploring, which you were able to put into words for me that I kind of wasn't able to articulate, and was a great meeting point for us, is the shadow work of organisations. Because we only, I bang on about this, but you've only got to look at, the Post Office Horizon thing, Grenfell, Hillsborough, the list goes on and on and on and on of all the failings of human beings when they're in a group and should be doing the right thing, not doing the right thing, lying and cheating and covering up to avoid the greater humiliation. And so that's something that I'd really love to get your sense of it, of the shadow work needed in organisations.
Wonderful, great question, and what a wonderful thing to explore in this time. So going back to Jung, who I spoke about early on, one of his theories around shadow was the collective shadow. So we talked about the collective unconscious shadow that we carry as a race of people. And if you break that down to kind of ethnicities, so in one of the things, I'm Afro-Caribbean, I was born in Antigua. My lineage goes back to those people that were brought onto that island as slaves, where they were taken there from Africa. So if you imagine that for that group of people, there's this shadow that sits in our collective kind of identity around who we actually are in terms of our identity to those lands of the Caribbean, and never mind to the lands of this place, and then to the lands of Africa. That disconnect that sits inside us that we know is part of our ancestry, but we can't actually connect into because we don't have access to that. So that's just on one level. So you talk about organizations. Now, organizations, as you know, I know, and everyone else watching this knows, have cultures. And that culture comes from somewhere. It's set by people. And within that organizational culture, there will be all the unspoke to rules and ideas about what it is to work in this organization. And a lot of that is going to be sat in the shadow. Who has power? How power is used, how power is used over people, how power is used to kind of control people will be sat in that kind of, and the thing I've come to realize, having spent 35 years working in health and social care for all sorts of charities and all sorts of non-profit organizations, that just because the intentions of the organization are set fair does not mean that the way the organization then carries out its business is done in an ethical way. And I could really go deep into this even from my last organization around, because one of the shadows there that we had, that I noticed for us in the Band of Brothers, was we trained older men to work with younger men, and our care was for the younger men. And what sat And what sat in the shadow was we didn't leave anything for ourselves, and our care for our leaders and our volunteer staff somehow was secondary to what we gave to the young men. And that was a shadow, because then we had a lot of older men acting out all the time. And most of the problems that I was dealing with were not with the younger men that came here from the criminal justice system, were from the older men who were not being heard and were having problems with us as an organisation. And that was part of our shadow. And the way we dealt with it in leadership was in shadows. And I see that so often in so many organisations. I was listening to this morning. The reports come out about this Panorama program and the way the police have been. Met Police's actions are under the microscope again, with various officers being stood down. I won't go into details or anything, but what's very clear is when you have young people join an organisation that is heavily top down in terms of hierarchical leadership around power and control over, there is going to be a disconnect in how that then connects to the public. And many of us know that for years there's been problems with not just the Met Police, with all police forces. And part of the problem there is the power over shadow that sits within there, a kind of control and directiveness of that kind of organization. So there's a whole heap of shadow that sat within the police force that it's impossible for them to face, because all their leaders have been socialized and trained in the same way. So they're not looking at it from fresh eyes. And the people that kind of are meant to be policing the police, if you like, they're toothless. They can't do the job they're there to do. So it's a circle that goes round and round and round, and it sits in so many of our older institutions. If we look at the health and care system, if we look at the justice system, wherever we look, the system's been around a hell of a long time and never dealt with the basic sense of what is our identity of self? How do we kind of express that identity in terms of how we work with our people and how we then interact with the end user? If it's based on power over, if it's based on domination, then there's going to be a shadow involved, and then there is going to be problems. And until there's a root and branch shift, and then in a lot of these organizations, I'm afraid, it's my belief, not a lot's going to change.
So it's really interesting you brought up the Panorama thing, because my phone was buzzing with, people saying, did you see it? Did you see it? You need to go in and help them. They need help, blah, blah, blah. Lots of people, say, knowing the work I do. And, interestingly enough, I tried that many years ago. I spent a good 3 years intensely working with police, and this is your shadow stuff that you're talking about. Firstly, I was treated very badly, and I could give you a couple of really good examples. But secondly, the conclusion I come to is the shadow is so strong, and I wouldn't have used those words before sort of talking to you about it, but the shadow is so strong that they will not trust anyone external to, there's just no way. You have to have a connection to that system. There's just no space for trust externally. And I'll just give you a very small example. I went to what I thought was a meeting in a local police station about, the crime in the area and stuff, because the work we were doing on the streets. And it actually was a telling off. And it was a telling off because the restorative work that I'd done had deprived an officer of an arrest. And I was sat in a meeting being torn off a strip, not prepared for this meeting. And I was given a mug. They offered me a cup of tea, and I was given a mug. And on the side of it was a picture of a woman. And as the heat of the tea met the ink on the mug, the woman's clothes came off, and they thought it was hilarious to give me that mug. And they literally told me off and laughed at me. So, and I've got multiple of these experiences. and there was no one to tell.
I'm sorry you had that experience, Maria. And there you go. You've come in as an outsider to bring some light, to bring some wisdom to an organization that needs it. And this is how you're treated as a person with your experience, with your understanding, and with your capacity to actually bring change. And everything is in that example you've just given about why organizations will struggle unless they're prepared to do what's necessary and have a real, you spoke about it earlier on, you talked about the mirror. Unless all organizations are prepared to stand in front of that mirror and see the darkness for what it actually is. But it's so deep. How do we even start this? How do we even go there? Well, I have an easy answer to that. One by one, each individual taking responsibility for their own sense and their own shadow. If each individual says, well, actually there is something I need to look at for me. There is stuff that, maybe the way as a senior police officer, I treat my children, I treat my wife. Maybe there's something within that kind of how I use power. Maybe I need to look at that. And that's where the change starts. We don't need to change the whole organization because we don't ever get there. But one by one, individuals taking responsibility for the actions that they bring. And we all know what we're doing with ourselves. I know little areas sometimes when I'm sat in my car and I'm suddenly going to beep the one and say, there you go. You're projecting your anger onto someone else's. Some of your deep-seated feelings that you're not comfortable with, it's them lot in the traffic who's causing your problems. I'm not the problem because although I'm part of the traffic.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Well, this is amazing. And I think what we'll do is we'll do a much longer episode. We'll do a special and dive a lot deeper into this because we only have a few minutes left in our time together. And I know that we've got plans to kind of do things together in the future. So I have a couple of questions. The first one is really simple. If people wanted to know more or reach you in some way, how can we find you?
That's a great question. My website's just coming together. So you have my email address, and I'm happy for you to give my email address out. It's connors.harris, CONNORS, connors.harris@gmail.com.
Great, amazing. And then I have a sort of surprise question, if you like. And that is if I were to in a position to give you the keys to the Ministry of Justice today, and you could make one change tomorrow, what change would you make?
Again, that's such a juicy question.
I know, isn't it? And I've allowed us a few minutes to really dip into this one.
Right. Interestingly, where I'd go is where we've gone on this question. I would start by having a conglomerate of people, a group of people such as yourself, Maria, people like myself and a few, and all the leaders would have to come and do some retraining around their shadow, around their dark spots, around their connection to domination culture. On day one, that self-reflective work with each leader would start. That's where I'd actually go with it, and put them in that room and make them face up to the reality of their lives. And I just wonder how many of them would actually stay in their jobs after spending a week or so training with the likes of you and me, who would realize that maybe that they wanted to do and needed to do something else with their life. It's a really good response to the question, because we talk about trauma-informed practice now. That's a big sort of spin around for a while, but as I navigate these systems on the ground, what I see is the trauma-informed practice is supposed to be for the service users, for the beneficiaries, for the children, for the prisoners, for the people on the ground. And yet nobody seems to be asking a really important question, which is, what is the trauma-informed work for people who have power over other people? For me, nobody's talking about this, but it's critical. If you want to be a judge where you can actually alter the course of somebody's life, or, you have this power to
to change the direction of other people's lives, or to make their life a misery, or to lift them up. You know, you've got that power. Then what could be, it's not 100% everybody, but what could be the trauma or what happened to you that led you to want to have a position of power in the world?
And we're going to have a special, because
we are.
Let's not even start around boarding school trauma and what happens to so many of those people that end up in these positions. So yes, there is exactly that. And the same with senior police officers, prison officers, all of these people. What is it about that need for power over others? That what is driving that? And in some cases, because there are wonderful people working in the criminal justice system, you're going to find that there is positive attachment, positive connection. But because there's so many of those organizations working this disconnected way, then that tells us something deeper is going on.
Absolutely.
Because so many people are discontented.
And then there is the superficiality of ethics. That, you know, we're all supposed to be believing that there's all this, you know, superficial veneer. But actually, when you look underneath it, there's a lot of stuff there that's just rotten.
That's again, you're doing a door handle moment.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, God. But
what ethics and what is ethical, and how we transmit it. You know, when we so used to, there's this acceptance that politicians lie.
Yeah.
Well, how's that an acceptance?
Absolutely.
These is the people that are shaping our lives.
Yeah.
What do you mean it's okay that they lie? It's not okay.
Yeah.
It really isn't. That there is so little integrity in politics. It's not okay.
Yeah.
And
amazing.
Let's not even get started on that one. But
well, it sounds like this is just the intro to something much deeper that we'll do live in person at some point, I think. But Conroy, this has been amazing. It's always a joy to talk to you. I'm always enriched listening to you. So thank you. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this. I must admit, I love showing off our friendship.
And I love being in love with our friendship. So I'm happy to show this off, because this is how people from different backgrounds, people from different kind of areas of society can come together and start to make change together. So thank you for inviting me on, Maria. It's been a treasure. It's been a blast.
Thank you.